Some folks say home is where you hang your hat, but I reckon home is where someone waits for you to come back. This story came to me from an old-timer in Wyoming, passed down like a worn quilt through 3 generations. It is about a woman who had nothing left to lose and a man the whole town feared to look in the eye. Neither one was looking for love. They were just trying to survive. But sometimes, the good Lord has plans we cannot see coming. This is their story told, the way it was told to me, plain and true, the way stories ought to be told. The last train pulled away from Copper Creek Station, dragging its shadow across the platform like a funeral shroud. Rose did not move. 3 days. She had knocked on every door in town, the boarding house, the general store, the laundry. Nobody was hiring a woman alone, especially one with no kin and no references. The landlady had made that clear this morning, along with something else. Stay away from that Callahan fellow. He's the one nobody looks in the eye. $47. 2 years of saving, gone to a swindler named Hector Finch. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her skirt, felt the letter crumple beneath her fingers. Then she heard it, boot heels on wood, slow, deliberate. The men at the water trough stopped talking. The old fellow on the porch backed inside without a word. Rose lifted her head. A man emerged from the saloon, leading a saddled chestnut horse, tall, eyes the color of Winter Creek water, and just as cold. The whole street held its breath. She stood up. If this story reminds you of someone who kept going when the road got hard, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from today. As my grandmother used to say, shared stories warm the heart twice. Yeah. Rose stepped into his path before she could think better of it. The chestnut horse snorted, tossing its head. The man's hand moved to the reins, steadying the animal. But his eyes never left her face. Up close, she could see the stubble on his jaw, a white scar cutting through his left eyebrow, deep lines carved around his mouth. "Mister." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. The 2 men at the water trough had not moved. She could feel their stares on her back. "I ain't asking for charity," she said. "I'm offering a deal." He did not answer, just looked at her the way a man looks at a stray dog blocking the road, deciding whether to go around or wait it out. Rose lifted her chin. "I can cook, I can clean, I can mend clothes good as any woman in this town." She swallowed. "Reckon that's worth a roof, ain't it?" Still nothing. The horse shifted its weight, leather creaking. "You don't know me," he said finally. His voice was low, rough, like gravel dragged over wood. "No, sir. I don't." Rose kept her hands at her sides, though they wanted to shake. "But I know I ain't got nowhere else to go, and seems to me you ain't in no hurry to stay here neither." Something flickered in those cold eyes. Not warmth, nothing close to that, but something. He looked past her toward the boarding house where Mrs. Henley was watching from behind the curtain, then back to Rose. His gaze dropped to her hands and the calluses, the scar across her right knuckle from a loom accident 3 years back, the nails cut short and rough, working hands, hands that knew labor. "There's a meal house across the street," he said. "I'll buy you supper. You tell me your story." He paused. "Then we'll see." He walked toward the small building without looking back. Rose stood there for a moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. The men at the water trough were staring openly now. Mrs. Henley's curtain had dropped back into place. She picked up her valise. The meal house smelled of bacon grease and boiled beans, 4 wooden tables, a counter at the back, flies buzzing against the window glass. Rose followed the man called Callahan to a corner booth, away from the light. He ordered 2 bowls of navy bean soup without asking what she wanted. She did not complain. When the food came in brown stoneware bowls with dented tin spoons, Rose waited. She watched him pick up his spoon first. Only then did she reach for her own. He noticed, said nothing. "Name's Bo," he said between bites. "Bo Callahan." Rose Whitmore. "Whitmore," he repeated the name slowly. "That your married name was—" Rose tasted the soup, salt and pork fat, and soft beans. Her stomach clenched with hunger. "Thomas passed 2 years back. Typhoid took him." Bo grunted, kept eating. "We worked the mills together," Rose continued. "Lowell, Massachusetts, 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week." She set down her spoon. "He was a good man. Didn't deserve what took him. Most folks don't." She told him the rest. The advertisement in the Boston paper. The letters from Hector Finch, each one warmer than the last. The $47, 2 years of savings. Skipped meals. Shoes mended until the soles wore through. "Got here 3 days ago," she said. "Finch never showed. Checked with the telegraph office. No such man registered in Denver." Her hands lay flat on the table, palms down. "I got swindled. Mr. Callahan. Plain and simple." Bo mopped the last of his soup with a piece of bread. His eyes moved to her hands again, the calluses, the scars. "You got kin back east. None that want me. Friends, not anymore." He chewed, swallowed, set down his bread. "Place I got is 2 hours out," he said. "Cabin my ma built with my pa before I was born. She passed 2 years ago. I been there alone since—" Rose waited. Her pulse beat hard in her throat. "It ain't much. 1 room, a loft, a well out back." He met her eyes. "I ain't looking for a wife. Not the way you mean, but I could use someone to keep house, cook, tend what my ma left behind. And in return, roof over your head, food in your belly, my name. If you need it to keep folks from asking questions." Rose's mouth went dry. "Why? You don't know me from Adam." Bo was quiet for a long moment. The noise of the meal house filled the silence, clattering dishes, low voices, a chair scraping the floor. "My ma came out here the same way you did," he said finally. "Answered an ad in a newspaper. Traveled 1,500 miles to marry a man she'd never met." He pushed his empty bowl aside. "She used to say the West ain't kind to folks who don't help each other." He stood, dropped coins on the table. "We leave in an hour. Get your things." Rose watched him walk out into the fading light. Her hands were trembling again. She pressed them flat against the table until they stopped. She had not asked why the whole town was afraid of him, and he had not offered to tell her. The trail wound through yellow hills under a sky so wide it hurt to look at. Rose sat behind Bo on the chestnut horse, her hands gripping the back of the saddle, her valise tied to the saddlebags. The leather creaked with every step. The horse's muscles shifted beneath her, a rhythm she was not used to. Her thighs ached. Her back ached. The sun pressed down on her shoulders like a hot iron. 2 hours. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the horse's hooves on packed earth, the whisper of wind through dry grass, and somewhere far off, the cry of a hawk circling. Rose watched Bo's back, the set of his shoulders. The way he held the reins loose but steady, he did not turn around, did not check if she was still there, just rode. The land stretched out in every direction, no fences, no roads, no houses, just grass and sky and the blue line of mountains in the distance. Rose had never seen so much empty space in her life. In Lowell, you could not walk 10 feet without bumping into someone. Here, a person could disappear and never be found. The thought settled in her stomach like a cold stone. They crested a ridge, and Bo pulled the horse to a stop. Below them, tucked into a fold of the valley, sat a cabin. It was smaller than Rose had imagined. Gray pine boards, weathered silver by years of sun and wind. A roof of wooden shakes, patched in places with newer timber. One window facing east, the glass clouded with dust. A porch running along the front, the boards sagging slightly in the middle. But behind it, a creek ran clear and bright over a bed of smooth stones. Willow trees lined the banks, their branches trailing in the water. The sound reached her even from here, a soft, constant murmur. Bo nudged the horse forward without a word. They rode down the slope and stopped in front of the porch. Bo dismounted, then held the horse steady while Rose climbed down. Her legs nearly buckled when her boots hit the ground. She grabbed the saddle to steady herself. Bo led the horse to a small corral behind the cabin. Rose stood alone in front of the door, her valise in her hand, looking at the place that was supposed to be her home. The door was not locked. It swung open at her touch, hinges groaning. Inside, dust hung in the air, caught in the slant of light from the window. Rose stepped over the threshold. Her boots left prints on the floor. One room, a cast-iron cook stove in the corner, cold and black. A table with 2 chairs, one of them pushed back as if someone had just stood up. A bed against the far wall, covered with a patchwork quilt in faded indigo and rust red. The stitches were small and even the work of someone who knew what they were doing. A rocking chair sat beside a Franklin stove, angled toward the window. A basket of mending rested beside it, a needle still threaded, stuck into a half-finished patch. On a shelf above the bed, a photograph in a wooden frame. Rose crossed the room and picked it up. Through the dust on the glass, a woman's face looked back at her, gray hair pulled back, kind eyes, a mouth that might have smiled easily, once. Rose used the corner of her sleeve to wipe the glass clean. She did not ask who it was. She already knew. She set the photograph back on the shelf, exactly where it had been when she turned around. Bo was standing in the doorway. He was watching her. His face was unreadable. "It's a good house," Rose said. "Solid. Ma built most of it." His voice was quiet. Pa helped, but she was the one knew where everything should go. Rose looked at the quilt on the bed, at the careful stitches. She had good hands. "Yeah." Bo's jaw tightened. "She did." Silence filled the space between them. The creek murmured outside. A fly buzzed against the window glass. "There's a well out back," Bo said finally. "Privy's past the oak tree." He stepped back from the doorway. "I'll be on the porch if you need anything." "Mr. Bo?" He cut her off. "Just Bo," Rose nodded. "Bo, thank you." He was already turning away. "Don't thank me yet, ma'am. Winter out here ain't kind." She heard his boots on the porch boards. Then the creak of a chair as he sat down. Rose stood alone in the cabin. The dust settled around her. The afternoon light was fading, turning gold. then orange, then gray. She found a tin basin under the table, a water bucket beside the door. She pumped water from the well, carried it back inside, began to wipe down the surfaces, the table, the chairs, the cook stove. Her hands moved without thinking, the way they had moved for 12 years in the mill. Work was something she understood. The mending basket she did not touch. The rocking chair she left where it was. That night, Bo slept on the porch in an old wooden chair, a blanket pulled over his shoulders. Rose lay on the bed, the quilt pulled up to her chin. It smelled of lavender and dust, and something else, something that might have been a woman's perfume. Long faded. The creek sang outside the window. The stars were brighter than any she had ever seen. She did not sleep. Sometime in the small hours, she heard Bo get up, heard his footsteps cross the porch, heard him stop at the door. He stood there for a long moment. Then he walked away. Rose stared at the ceiling. The photograph on the shelf caught the moonlight, the woman's face pale and watching. She wondered how long Eliza May Callahan had been dead, and she wondered what had happened to the man who built this cabin with her, the man Bo had not mentioned once. The first month passed in silence and small gestures. Rose learned the rhythm of the cabin, the creak of the floorboards in the cold morning, the way the light moved across the room as the day turned, the sound of Bo's boots on the porch before the dawn. She learned when to speak and when to stay quiet. Mostly, she stayed quiet. They talked maybe 10 sentences a day, sometimes fewer, but on a morning in early July, Bo appeared in the cabin doorway while Rose was washing the breakfast dishes. "Come with me," he said. She dried her hands on her apron and followed. He led her around the back of the cabin, past the well, to where the meadow sloped down toward Willow Creek. The grass was still wet with dew, silver in the early light. Her boots left dark trails as she walked. Bo stopped at a patch of mud near the water's edge. He crouched, pointed. "See that?" Rose knelt beside him. In the soft earth, a set of tracks pressed deep and clear, 2 larger prints, 2 smaller ones beside them. The edges were sharp, the mud still damp. "Deer," Bo said. "Doe with a fawn." Passed through it around dawn. Rose reached out and touched the nearest print. The mud was cool against her fingertip. "How do you know it was dawn?" "Dew's already settling in the track. Means it was made before the sun hit this spot." He stood, brushed his hands on his trousers. "You learn to read the land out here. It tells you things, if you pay attention." That afternoon, he took her up the slope behind the cabin. The sun beat down, hot and dry. Grasshoppers clicked in the brush, leaping away from their feet. Bo walked ahead, stopping now and then to point at plants Rose had never seen. "Wild onion." He pulled one from the ground and held it up. The bulb was small and white. The green tops wilted in the heat. "Smell it." Rose took it and brought it to her nose, sharp and pungent. "Good in stew," Bo said. "Good raw if you got nothing else." He moved on, pointed to a low bush covered in dark purple berries. "Serviceberry, ripe now. Pick as many as you can carry." Rose plucked one and bit into it, sweet and soft, with tiny seeds that crunched between her teeth. "And this?" Bo crouched beside a plant with thick, fleshy roots and pale pink flowers. "Bitter root. Peel the outer layer. Boil what's left. Tastes like nothing much, but it'll keep you alive when the snow comes." Rose repeated the names in her head. Wild onion, serviceberry, bitterroot. She did not ask him to repeat himself. They climbed higher. The slope grew steeper, the rocks loose under Rose's boots. She watched Beau's back, trying to step where he stepped. Her foot slipped on a flat stone. She went down hard, her right knee striking granite. Pain shot up her leg. She heard herself gasp, felt the warm trickle of blood soaking through her stocking. Beau stopped, turned, looked at her. He did not come back, did not offer his hand. Just stood there, 10 feet up the slope, waiting. Rose gritted her teeth. She pressed her palm against the rock and pushed herself up. Her knee throbbed. Blood ran down her shin into her boot. She took one step, then another. Her jaw was tight, her eyes stinging, but she kept moving. Beau nodded once, turned, kept walking. By the time they reached the ridge, Rose's leg was stiff and aching, but she had not complained, had not asked to stop. When Beau finally paused at the top, overlooking the valley, he looked at her differently than he had before. "You'll do," he said. That night, they sat on the porch as the sky turned orange and purple over the mountains. Rose had wrapped her knee with a strip of clean cloth. The bleeding had stopped. The pain had faded to a dull throb. Beau sat in his chair, whittling a piece of pine. The shavings curled at his feet. "That creek," Rose said, nodding toward the water. "It got a name, Willow Creek." He did not look up from his work. "Runs all the way down from the mountains. Feeds into the Powder River about 30 miles south." "Your ma name it." "Nah. It had the name before she got here. Before anyone got here, I reckon." He was quiet for a moment. "She used to sit right where you're sitting, every evening, after supper," said the sound of the water helped her think. Rose listened. The creek murmured over its stones, steady and low, as understood what his mother had meant. "Beau, what happened to your pa?" His hand stopped moving. The knife hovered over the wood. His shoulders stiffened. The silence stretched out between them. The creek kept singing. A night bird called somewhere in the darkness. "That," Beau said finally, "is a story for another night." He stood up and walked off the porch, disappearing into the shadows beyond the cabin. Rose sat alone, listening to the water. The stars came out, one by one, scattered across the black sky like spilled salt. She looked at the empty chair beside her. She was beginning to understand that this place held more than dust and memories. It held secrets, and Beau Callahan was not ready to share them. Rose found the sewing box on the third shelf of the corner cupboard, behind a stack of yellowed newspapers and a tin of rusted nails. The wood was dark walnut, worn smooth at the edges from years of handling. She lifted the lid. Inside, spools of thread lay nested in their compartments indigo blue, madder red, cream white, forest green. The needles were tucked into a strip of wool felt, still sharp. A thimble sat in the corner, dented but whole. She carried the box to the table and set it down carefully. That evening, when Beau came in from mending the corral fence, she pointed at it. "Found this in the cupboard. Would you mind if I used it?" Beau looked at the box. His jaw tightened for a moment. Rose thought she'd made a mistake. "She'd want someone to use it," he said finally. "Better than letting it sit there turning to nothing." He walked past her to the wash basin without another word. Rose spent the next 3 evenings working on a tablecloth. She used the cream thread first, laying down a base of simple stitches, then added yellow flowers along the border wild daisies, the kind that grew in the meadow behind the cabin. Her stitches were not as fine as the ones she had seen on the quilt, but they were even. They held. When she spread the finished cloth across the table, Bo did not comment. But that night, he sat down to eat without hesitation. His plate centered on the embroidered fabric. His eyes moved across the yellow flowers once. Then he picked up his fork and started eating. Rose said nothing, but something loosened in her chest. The next morning, Bo left before dawn with his rifle. Rose heard the door close, heard his boots on the porch, heard the horse moving off toward the tree line. She made coffee, swept the floor, checked the sourdough starter she had begun the week before. By noon, she had baked 2 loaves of cornbread in the cast-iron Dutch oven. The smell filled the cabin cornmeal, rendered pork fat, the faint sweetness of molasses. She set the loaves on the table to cool and went outside to pull wild onions from the patch near the creek. Bo returned in the late afternoon with a rabbit slung over his shoulder. He stopped in the doorway. Rose was standing at the stove, her back to him, stirring the rabbit stew she had started an hour before. She heard him enter, but did not turn around. The smell of the cornbread had layered with the stew now meat and onion, and something deeper, something that made the cabin feel different than it had before. When she finally turned, Bo was still standing just inside the door. His eyes were closed. His chest rose and fell slowly. He opened his eyes and looked at her. "Smells like my ma's cooking," he said. His voice was rough. Rose wiped her hands on her apron. "I found her recipe book in the cupboard. Hope you don't mind." "I don't mind." They ate in silence. Theo finished his bowl, then reached for a second piece of cornbread without asking. Rose watched him tear it in half, drag it through the stew juice, bring it to his mouth. "This ain't half bad," he said. Perceives pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. "High praise. Don't let it go to your head." She stood to clear the dishes. "There's more where that came from." "I noticed. After supper." They sat on the porch as the sky turned violet. The air had cooled. Carrying the smell of pine and creek water, Rose pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Thomas used to say I cooked better than his mama," she said. The words came out before she could stop them. "I think he was lying, but it was a kind lie." Bo did not respond right away. He was looking out at the meadow, his hands loose on his knees. "How long were you married?" 2 years. Would have been 3 that October. Rose watched a hawk circling far above the tree line. "He was a good man, quiet, like you, worked hard, didn't complain." She paused. "He deserved better than what he got. Most folks do." The silence stretched between them. Rose realized she had been holding her breath. She let it out slowly. "Your ma," she said. "What was her name?" "Eliza. Eliza May Callahan. Pretty name. She was a pretty woman." Bo's voice softened. "Tough, though. Had to be, out here. Pa used to say she could outwork any 2 men he'd ever known." Rose thought of the sewing box, the careful stitches on the quilt, the recipe book with its handwritten notes in faded ink. "She taught you to read the land," Rose said. "Didn't she?" "Her and the land itself. Mostly the land." Another silence. The hawk had disappeared beyond the ridge. "Bo. That scar on your hand. The long one across the back." He looked down at his right hand, turned it over, The scar was white and thick. 10 years ago, cattle got spooked during a drive. Lion caught my hand wrong. He did not say more. Rose did not ask. But later that night, lying in the dark with the sound of the creek through the window, she noticed something she had not noticed before. Bo had come home earlier today than any day since she arrived. And when he had stood in that doorway, eyes closed, breathing in the smell of cornbread and stew for just a moment, the hard lines around his mouth had softened. She stared at the ceiling. She was beginning to change this place, and she wondered if this place was beginning to change her too. The ride to Copper Creek took 2 hours on the old mule Bo called Molly. Rose left at first light, a list in her pocket and coins tied in a handkerchief at her waist. Bo had counted out the money himself, enough for flour, salt, coffee, and kerosene for the lamps. Peterson's general store, he had said. Tell him to put it on my account if you run short. The road wound through dry hills and yellow grass. Molly plodded along at her own pace, unbothered by Rose's attempts to hurry her. By the time the first buildings of Copper Creek appeared on the horizon, the sun was already high and hot. Rose tied Molly to the post outside Peterson's and stepped onto the wooden boardwalk. Her boots echoed in the morning quiet. A man sitting on a barrel outside the saloon looked up, squinted at her, then looked away. The bell above the door jangled as she entered. Peterson smelled of leather and tobacco and the sharp sweetness of molasses. Barrels lined the walls. Sugar, rice, dried beans. Shelves climbed to the ceiling, stacked with tinned goods and bolts of fabric. Behind the counter, a thin man with spectacles looked up from his ledger. 2 women stood near the pickle barrel, their heads bent close together. At the sound of the bell, and they stopped talking. Their eyes moved to Rose, then to each other, then away. Rose walked to the flour shelf. She could feel their stares on her back as she examined the sacks. 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 20. She reached for the 5-pound bag, turned it over to check for weevil holes. You're the one living out at the Callahan place. The voice came from behind her. Rose turned. The woman was perhaps 50, with gray hair pulled back tight and a black dress buttoned to her throat despite the heat. Her eyes were small and hard, her mouth pressed into a thin line. Yes, ma'am, Rose said. I'm Martha Morrison. The name hit Rose like cold water. Morrison. The family the boarding house woman had warned her about. Mrs. Morrison? Rose kept her voice even. Pleased to meet you. I doubt that. The woman stepped closer. She smelled of lavender water and something sour underneath. My son Tom near lost the use of his hand because of that man you're keeping house for. Did he tell you that? Rose's fingers tightened on the flour sack. He told me there was trouble. Trouble? Mrs. Morrison's lip curled. Is that what he called it? That man is dangerous? Girl? He's got a temper no one can control. You'd do well to get away from him, while you still can. The 2 women by the pickle barrel had stopped pretending not to listen. The man behind the counter was watching too, his pen frozen above the ledger. Rose set the flour sack on the counter. She looked at Mrs. Morrison directly. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern. Truly. She kept her voice steady, though her heart was beating hard. But I reckon I know Bo Callahan better than most folks in this town. Leastways, I ain't afraid to look him in the eye. Mrs. Morrison's face went red. You foolish girl. You don't know what you're dealing with. Maybe not. Rose placed the kerosene can beside the flour. But I know what I've seen, And I've seen a man who works hard, keeps his word, and hasn't raised his voice to me once in 6 weeks. She turned to the man behind the counter. Mr. Peterson, I'd like to settle up. Please. She paid in coins, refusing to put anything on Beau's account. Let them see she had her own money. Let them see she was not some helpless creature being kept against her will. The ride back felt longer than the ride in. The sun beat down on Rose's shoulders. Molly's hooves kicked up dust that stuck to her sweaty skin. By the time the cabin came into view, her throat was dry and her head ached. Beau was sitting on the porch when she rode up. He stood as she dismounted, took Molly's reins without a word, led the mule to the corral. Rose carried the supplies inside. Her hands were shaking as she set them on the table. That night, they ate in silence. The cornbread sat untouched between them. Rose pushed beans around her plate, her appetite gone. Finally, she set down her fork. I met Martha Morrison today. Beau's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. He lowered his spoon. She had things to say about you, Rose continued. About her son, about what happened. I reckon she did. Tell me. Beau was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the creek murmured its endless song. A night bird called somewhere in the darkness. Tom Morrison, he said finally. 1.5 years ago. Card game at the saloon. He picked up his coffee, took a slow sip. He'd been drinking, losing, decided I was cheating him. Were you? No. What happened? He pulled a knife, came at me across the table. Beau set the cup down. I grabbed his wrist, twisted, heard the bone go. He looked at his hands, spread flat on the table. Wasn't proud of it, but it was him or me. Rose watched his face, the hard line of his jaw, the way his eyes stayed fixed on his hands. Why didn't you tell the sheriff? Morrison's got money. Sheriff's got debts. Beau shrugged. Don't take much figuring. So you just let them say whatever they wanted about you. What was I going to do? Stand in the street and argue with every fool who believed the Morrison version? He shook his head. Wasn't worth the trouble. Rose reached across the table. Her fingers brushed the back of his hand just for a moment, light as a breath. I believe you, she said. Beau looked up. His eyes searched her face. Just like that. I worked 12 years in a mill full of liars, Beau. I know what a man looks like when he's telling the truth. He stared at her for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face, not softening. Not exactly. But the wall behind his eyes seemed to thin. You're a strange woman. Rose Whitmore. I've been called worse. The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. Outside, the wind had picked up. Rose heard it moving through the grass, heard the creak of the porch boards, heard something else beneath it all, a low, distant rumble that might have been thunder. Beau's head turned toward the window. His almost smile disappeared. Storm coming, he said. Big one. By the feel of it. Rose looked out at the darkening sky. She did not know yet how right he was. The evening came on slow and golden. Rose sat on the porch with a torn shirt in her lap, needle moving through the worn fabric. Beau was beside her in the other chair, a whetstone in one hand, his hunting knife in the other. The scrape of steel against stone filled the silence between them, steady, rhythmic. Their shoulders were close, not touching, but near enough that Rose could feel the warmth of him through her sleeve. Neither spoke. The sky turned orange, then purple, then the deep blue that came just before the stars. The creek sang behind the cabin. Somewhere in the meadow, a nightjar called its evening song. Rose tied off her thread and bit it clean. Done. Bo glanced at the mended shirt, nodded once, went back to his knife. She did not move to go inside. Neither did he. They sat until the stars came out, scattered across the black sky like salt spilled on a dark table. The air cooled. Rose pulled her shawl tighter. Bo set down his knife and whetstone, rested his hands on his knees. "Good night," Rose said finally. "Night." She went inside, but before she closed the door, she looked back. Bo was still sitting there, looking out at the darkness, the starlight catching the lines of his face. The next morning, Rose woke to an empty cabin. She found Bo on the porch, standing at the railing, his coffee untouched on the rail beside him. Steam rose in the cool air. "What is it?" He did not answer immediately. Rose stepped out beside him. Pulling her shawl tight against the morning chill, she followed his gaze. The sky to the north was wrong. Clouds piled high above the mountains, not the white clouds of summer storms, but something darker, heavy, the color of wet slate, bruised and swollen. "Been dry 6 weeks," Bo said. His voice was flat. "Ground's baked hard as stone. Mountain's been holding the snowmelt back." Rose watched a flock of red-winged blackbirds rise from the meadow, wheeling east in a dark wave. More birds followed, then more. The sky filled with them, all moving the same direction. "When that water comes down," Bo continued, "it won't soak in. It'll run. Fast. Below them, in the valley, Rose could see dark shapes moving through the yellow grass. Buffalo, a small herd, maybe 15 head, plodding steadily toward higher ground. "The animals know," she said. "They always know first." Bo turned from the railing. He walked past her into the cabin, emerged a moment later with his saddlebags. Rose watched him cross to the corral, watched him throw the blanket over the chestnut's back, watched him cinch the saddle tight. "Where are you going?" "Town." Rose's stomach dropped. "Bo." "They're sitting right in a V path." He pulled the cinch strap, checked it. "Creek runs straight through Main Street. When that water hits, it'll take everything with it." "They won't listen to you." "Probably not." He swung up into the saddle. The chestnut danced sideways, sensing something in the air. Bo steadied it with his knees. Rose walked to the corral fence. Her hands gripped the rough wood until splinters bit into her palms. "Then why go after everything they said about you, after what that Morrison woman—" "Because it's the right thing." His voice was steady. "That's all." Rose stared up at him. The morning light was behind him, casting his face in shadow. She could not read his expression. "Bo." He looked down at her. "Do you have to come back?" The question hung in the air between them. Rose heard it differently than she had meant it, heard what she was really asking. Bo was quiet for a long moment. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of rain that had not fallen in 6 weeks. Then something shifted in his eyes. The coldness that she had seen that first day at the train station, the wall he kept between himself and the world, it thinned. "Yes," he said. "I got a reason to." He reached down, pulled the Colt from his holster, held it out to her. "You know how to use this." Rose took the gun. The metal was warm from his body, heavy in her hands. "In case I'm late," he said. She wanted to say something. Something that would make him understand. But the words stuck in her throat. Bo turned the horse toward the road. Then he stopped, looked back. Rose stood at the fence, the gun in her hands, the wind pulling at her hair. He nodded once. She nodded back. Then he kicked the chestnut into a gallop and disappeared over the ridge in a cloud of dust. Rose stood there long after he vanished. The wind grew stronger, carrying the smell of rain and something else, something metallic and cold. She walked back to the porch, sat down in Bo's chair. The wood was still warm from where he had been sitting the night before. She laid the colt across her lap and waited. The clouds rolled closer. The birds had all gone silent. Even the creek seemed to hold its breath. Then she saw it, in the far distance, where the mountains met the sky. A wall of darkness was moving down the valley. Not clouds, not shadow. Water. A churning brown wave carrying trees and debris, rolling toward the valley below like the hand of something ancient and angry. Rose stood up. The town was directly in its path, and Bo was riding straight toward it. Bo rode into Copper Creek at a hard gallop. Main Street was quiet, a few folks on the boardwalk. A wagon parked outside Peterson's, the saloon doors swinging in the rising wind. Nobody looked up until he pulled his horse to a skidding stop in front of the sheriff's office. "Flood coming." His voice cracked across the street. "Get to high ground." Now, heads turned, faces stared. Nobody moved. Sheriff Burroughs stepped out of his office, one hand resting on his gun belt. He was a heavy man, red-faced, with a mustache that needed trimming. "Callahan, you got some nerve showing your face here. Listen to me." Bo swung down from the saddle. "Willow Creek's coming down. Big. The whole valley's going to be underwater inside an hour. Flood." Burroughs laughed. "It ain't rained in 6 weeks. That's the problem. Mountain's been holding the snow melt. When it breaks, the sheriff shook his head. "You're crazy, Callahan. Always were." The ground trembled. Bo felt it through his boots, a deep, rhythmic shudder, like the heartbeat of something enormous waking up. The horse behind him whinnied and pulled at the reins. "You feel that?" Bo pointed toward the north end of town. "That's the water, coming down through the canyon." People were gathering now, stepping out of stores, off porches, the 2 women from Peterson's, the old man from the saloon, Tom Morrison, his left wrist still wrapped in a canvas brace, standing in the doorway of the feed store. They all stared at Bo. Nobody moved. Then the sound came, a roar, low at first, like distant thunder that would not stop. It grew louder, deeper. The boards under their feet began to shake. Bo did not wait for permission. He ran to the nearest house, a low wooden building at the creek end of Main Street. He hammered on the door with his fist. "Get out. Get to the church now." The door opened. A woman with a baby on her hip stared at him, eyes wide. "Go." He grabbed her arm, pulled her toward the street. "Run!" The roar was getting louder. Bo could see it now, a dark line at the far end of town. Moving fast, water, brown and churning, carrying branches and debris, rolling toward them like something alive. People finally started to move. Screams, running feet, the crash of doors slamming open. Bo went from house to house, pounding, shouting, dragging people out when they moved too slow, an old man who could barely walk, a boy who had frozen in terror, a woman who kept trying to go back for her cat. The water hit the first buildings while Bo was still in the street. It came up to his knees, then his waist, cold, shockingly cold. The current grabbed at his legs. Trying to pull him down, he braced himself against a hitching post. Watched the brown tide sweep past. A scream cut through the noise. Bo turned. 30 feet away, clinging to a porch rail, a child was struggling against the water. Small, maybe 5 years old. A boy with yellow hair plastered to his head. Bo pushed off from the post. The current slammed into him. Trying to spin him around, he fought it. 1 step. 2. The water was up to his chest now, pressing against him like a giant hand. The boy's grip was slipping. Bo lunged. His hand closed around the child's wrist just as the small fingers let go. He pulled the boy against his chest. Felt the thin arms wrap around his neck. "I got you." The words came out hoarse. "Hold on." He looked around. The church was on higher ground, 50 yards away, between him and the church. The water churned with debris, broken boards, a spinning chair, something dark that might have been a dead calf. On the roof of the nearest house, people were gathering. He could see Mrs. Morrison up there, her face white, her mouth open. Bo waded toward the house. Each step was a battle. The water pushed and pulled, trying to tear the boy from his arms. His boots slipped on the mud beneath. Twice he nearly went down. He reached the house. The water was up to his shoulders now. "Take him." He lifted the boy over his head. Hands reached down from the roof, Mrs. Morrison's hands, and pulled the child up. The current caught Bo sideways. His feet went out from under him. He went under, swallowed water, came up choking. His hand found a window frame. He held on. The water kept rising. For 2 hours. Bo moved through the flood, wading, swimming, pulling people from windows and porches. His hands bled from the rope he used to haul a family onto the general store roof. His shoulders burned from lifting, his legs cramped in the cold water. He found Tom Morrison trapped in the feed store, water up to his chin, his braced wrist tangled on a nail. Bo kicked the door open, cut the brace free with his knife, dragged the man out without a word. Tom stared at him, said nothing, let himself be pulled to safety. When the water finally began to recede, the sun was low behind the mountains. Main Street was a river of mud and debris. Houses tilted on their foundations. The saloon had lost its front wall. But everyone was accounted for. Everyone was alive. Bo sat on the steps of the Methodist church, his clothes soaked through, his hands wrapped in strips torn from his own shirt. Blood had soaked through the bandages already. He did not care. He was too tired to care. Mrs. Morrison walked toward him. Her grandson clung to her hand, wrapped in someone's coat, shivering but whole. She stopped in front of Bo. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "You saved my grandbaby." Bo looked at his ruined hands. "Just did what needed doing, ma'am. I was wrong about you." He did not look up. "Don't matter none. It matters to me." Bo finally raised his eyes. Mrs. Morrison's face was streaked with mud and tears. Behind her, the people of Copper Creek stood in clusters, watching him. Tom Morrison was among them. His arm free of the brace now, his face unreadable. Nobody called him a killer. Nobody looked away. But all Bo could think about was Rose, alone at the cabin, Waiting for him to come home, he tried to stand. His legs gave out. He sat back down hard on the church steps. Someone brought him water. Someone else brought a blanket. Voices swirled around him, but he could not make out the words. The sun went down. The stars came out. And still Bo sat there, too exhausted to move, staring at the road that led back to the ridge. Back to her. Bo rode through the night. The road was washed out in places, thick with mud and debris. He had to go around twice, picking his way through unfamiliar ground in the darkness. The chestnut was exhausted, foam flecking its neck, but it kept moving, one step at a time. The moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light across the wet grass. The flood had not reached this high. The land looked the same as it always had: yellow meadows, dark pines, the ridgeline cutting against the stars. He came around the last bend as the sky was turning pink. The cabin stood where it had always stood. Smoke rose from the chimney. The window glowed with lamplight. Rose was on the porch. She did not run to him. She stood with a tin cup in her hands, steam rising in the cool morning air, and watched him ride in. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She was wearing the blue calico dress she had made from an old bolt of fabric they had found in the cupboard. Bo dismounted. His legs nearly buckled. He caught himself on the saddle, waited until the world stopped spinning. Rose walked down the steps. She took the reins from his hands. "I'll see to the horse," she said. "You go inside." He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her he could do it himself. But his hands were shaking, and his eyes burned, and the words would not come. He let her lead him to the porch. He sat down heavily on the top step and closed his eyes. When he opened them, the sun was high. He was lying on the bed inside the cabin, a blanket pulled over him. His boots were off. His hands had been washed and wrapped in clean white bandages. Rose sat by the window, her needle moving through fabric. She looked up when he stirred. "There's coffee on the stove," she said, "and biscuits, when you're ready." Bo pushed himself up. His whole body ached. His hands throbbed beneath the bandages. The pain felt distant. How long was I out? 12 hours, maybe more. He looked at the window. The light had changed afternoon now, golden and warm. "Town's still standing," he said. "Mostly, some damage, but everyone made it." Rose nodded. She did not ask for details. "You should rest more." "I've rested enough." She set down her sewing and crossed the room. She sat on the edge of the bed, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. "You came back," she said. "Told you I would." Her hand found his. She held it gently, careful of the wounds. A month passed. The town rebuilt. The mud dried. Life went on the way it always did in places where survival was never guaranteed. Tom Morrison rode out to the cabin on a Tuesday afternoon. Bo was mending the corral fence when he heard the horse approaching. He straightened up, hammer in hand, and watched the man dismount. Tom stood there for a long moment, his hat in his hands. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About you. About what happened." Bo set down the hammer. "That was a long time ago. Don't matter. Wrong is wrong." Tom stuck out his hand, his right hand, the one Bo had broken. "I'm sorry." Bo looked at the offered hand, then he took it. They did not say anything else. They did not need to. The following Sunday, a rider appeared on the ridge, gray mare, Side saddle, Mrs. Morrison. She rode up to the cabin on, her back straight, her face softer than Bo had ever seen it. Reverend Harrison will be riding out this way next week, she said. I asked him to stop here, if you're agreeable. Bo frowned. What for? Mrs. Morrison looked at Rose, standing in the doorway, and back at Bo. Seems to me you two ought to be married proper, if you're going to be living out here together. Rose came down from the porch. She stood beside Bo, her shoulder touching his. We'd like that, she said. Very much. The wedding was small. Reverend Harrison read from a worn Bible. Mrs. Morrison stood as witness, her grandson holding her hand. Tom Morrison shook Bo's hand again afterward. A real handshake this time. The kind that meant something. Rose wore a white muslin dress she had sewn herself, the stitches small and even. Bo wore a ring made from a copper penny he had hammered flat in the barn, the same penny his father had given his mother the day they were married. That night, they sat on the porch as the stars came out. The creek murmured behind them. The mountains stood dark against the sky. Rose leaned her head against his shoulder. Bo? This is home. He put his arm around her, pulled her close. Yeah, he said. It is. The word had never meant anything before. It had always been just a place. 4 walls and a roof, somewhere to sleep. But now, sitting here with Rose beside him and the stars overhead, and the sound of the creek filling the silence, now he understood what his mother had meant all those years ago. Home was not a place. Home was where someone waited for you to come back. There is a quiet that comes after a story like this one. Not the kind that needs filling. The kind that sits with you, the way an old friend might sit on a porch at evening, asking nothing, offering nothing but presence. Many of us have known what it feels like to stand at a crossroads with empty pockets and nowhere left to turn. Some of us have carried the weight of being misunderstood, of having our name spoken in whispers by people who never ask for our side. And perhaps you have known what it means to find shelter in an unexpected place, not because you earned it, but because someone chose to see you when others looked away. These things do not need to be explained. They do not need to be resolved. They simply are. And it is all right to let them rest there, in that tender space between what was and what became. Some feelings are meant to be held quietly, like a letter you never sent, like a photograph you keep in a drawer. You do not have to understand them. You are allowed to simply let them be. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening.